Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about the Twilight Zone. It's Season 5, Episode 36. It's called The Bewitchin Pool. And it is indeed the final episode of the season and of course the series as a whole. I've not checked how many episodes there are of the show, but with these 30 plus episode seasons, it's been quite a journey that started all the way back in 2019. And we're finally here at the end. It won't be the final Twilight Zone video I do. I'll still do my usual top 5 or 10 of the season. Depending on how strong I feel the list is, it'll either be 5 or 10. And I'll do that soon. I won't quite say next week because the schedule's quite hectic right now. But in the next few weeks, you'll get that video. So the rating for this one wasn't super hot on IMDb. I wasn't getting in with super high expectations. I wasn't necessarily expecting a stinker either. And yeah, I feel quite middling on it, ultimately. The premise of the episode is that two kids who are basically having a rough time at home. You know, it's a nice big fancy house, the family's clearly wealthy, but the parents are just constantly at each other's throat, bickering, arguing, and the kids are just kind of an afterthought to them. They're never nice to the kids either. I mean, they don't go out of their way to be cruel, but they're, like I said, they're an afterthought. And it just feels like they're just neglected. And the premise of the story is that the kids find a magic portal in their swimming pool, which takes them to another place where this nice old lady called Auntie looks after children who have come from broken homes. And they still have to do chores and stuff like that, but they get to make cakes and they get to have a happier life away from these awful parents. And the story of the episode is ultimately just kind of like the decision to eventually go there permanently and stay. That's what the old lady expects the first time they're there, but they're like, no, we have to go back because our parents love us. But then with each time they go back, more and more it's about the convincing of like them making this choice to abandon their parents by the end. So this is actually what's funny is that as part of a Patreon sponsored review, I've been doing 80s Twilight Zone. If you haven't checked that out already, and I'm about 7 or 8 episodes into the 80s version, and there was a story in there which was about a child getting to choose a new set of parents because the parents she had weren't good enough to her. That was a very short story because the way that show works is that they have multiple stories per episode, and sometimes you'll get one that's only 5 or so minutes. That was one of those, but it was a really interesting little take on the idea of a child being able to swap out their parents and the parents having no say in it. This isn't quite that. This is a little bit more, I don't know, Narnia-esque in the way that they travel somewhere else. It's only, I would say it's a middling episode for a couple of reasons. One big problem I had was that it does something that a lot of TV shows do, a lot of episodes of TV do, where they show part of the ending at the start of the episode. It's a really common thing to do in TV to try and build a bit of extra excitement or tension at the start to make the audience sort of be thinking about where it's going the whole time, where they'll show, you know, a moment from later on, and then they'll sort of, I mean, this show doesn't specifically say this, but often in modern shows it'll say 24 hours earlier or 48 hours earlier, whatever it is. And it'll go from there. This kind of does that, right? It doesn't have the caption, but it does that thing where it shows you a scene from later in the episode and then goes back to the beginning of the story and plays out from there. I would say that probably 70% of the time, this technique is a bit cheap. Sometimes it can be good, and there is valid reasons to do it occasionally. But more often than not, it tends to just be like, oh, this episode's not exciting enough, so let's show what it's building up to try and get people engaged right away, to keep them on board. Sometimes they make that decision incorrectly, and they never really needed to do it. The episode was completely fine without it, but they do it anyway. It's like just like a nitpick. Here, I actually think it's detrimental to the episode. Because it basically spoils that the kids are going to decide to go to the magic Narnia granny's house. Like, it shows you them making that decision from the end of the story at the start of the episode. With the parents, the scene in question is the parents telling the kids they're getting divorced, and that the kids are going to have to pick which parent they want to live with, which seems very unhealthy, might I add. And they're sort of like trying to beg and say, no, please, we'll be better. We know you only hate each other because we're here. We'll try and be good and whatever. And it's really, it's really quite sad to hear them say that. But they say, okay, let's just go back. And we don't know what they're talking about yet, but they run away and jump in the pool. And the parents stand there and watch, and then they start to get worried that they're drowning. And the wife yells, do something, they're drowning. So he like takes his jacket off and jumps in. And I was like, well, why aren't you jumping in? I mean, unless you tell me you can't swim or something, I don't understand why you're waiting for him to jump in. I can see why your marriage is falling apart. Both of you expect the other to just do it. He expects her to make dinner whenever he wants it. She expects him to do whatever. I don't know. Like, there's a lot of weird expectations being put on each other in this marriage. But anyway, so we get this scene that plays out. It's a couple of minutes long. And at the end of the episode, it plays out again. We get to see the entire thing. So part of it just feels like of your, you know, once you take off the opening and closing and whatnot, like you've got maybe 21, 22 minutes of actual story time. And it feels like 2 minutes or so of it are repeated and don't really offer any new context by the time you get there. So that's frustrating on a sort of repetition level. But I think the bigger problem with it is that this decision to abandon the parents and go permanently to Auntie to go and live there and like grow up there with her because the home life is not good. That's what the entire episode's building up to. The entire arc of the story is that the boy wants to stay there immediately, and the big sister's like, no, we can't. We have to go back with our parents. And she's speaking with a bit of maturity and logic and technically saying the right things, but ultimately this is her arc. This the daughter's arc of finally saying, hey, you know what, you're right. To hell with these assholes. Let's go live there because this is horrible and we're not being treated properly. That's the arc of the story. That's the entire, you know, crux of it. And they show the scene where she makes that choice at the end, at the start of the story. So there's almost nothing to like be engaged in until she makes that decision. Because you already know she's going to make it. And not only do you know she's going to make it, you know she's like the context of how she's going to make it. She's going to finally hit her breaking point when the parents say they're going to divorce and force this decision upon them. So we already know so much about how the story is going to end. And it's just because the episode itself tells us all at the start. It tells us everything. There's very little, like the intrigue of the magic place they're going to isn't that exciting. It's whatever. It's just kind of representation of whatever. It's the story is the daughter making this choice, and you show her why she's forced to make it ultimately, and the choice she makes ultimately at the end. The only thing it doesn't show you is that they successfully make it to the magic place, but it's not like I was expecting them to like drown and have like a super dark ending. You know, I wasn't predicting that. I didn't think that was a possibility. So there wasn't really a whole lot of like extra things to build up to. They kind of gave away the entire emotional like turning point of the story at the start. Like it could have maybe worked if you showed the parents say they're getting a divorce and then sort of like cut away as she's like clearly thinking about what she's going to do. And then maybe that would build some intrigue because you're like, okay, this is going to be a pivotal moment where she has to finally make the choice, but we don't actually get to see her make the choice. Obviously, it's a story, so we expect she's probably going to, and that's probably where it's going to go. But by showing us why she makes that choice, how she makes that choice, and the fallout of the parents when she makes that choice, where they finally actually seem to give a shit about their kids, they give it all away in the opening scene. It's wild to me. I don't understand the showing that at the start of the episode. And when it actually got back to that scene later on, I really just felt like it was a time thing. Like their episode was just too short, and the only way they could think to like extend it by a good 2.5 minutes was to take most of the ending and just repeat it at the start. So it feels like just padding, but it's actually detrimental to the enjoyment of the story arc of this character making a decision. Because it's all about her getting to the point where she's willing to make that choice. But we've already seen what makes her, you know, forces her into that choice, and we've already seen her make the choice. So what are we building to exactly, if nothing else? So really strange, really strange choice from a storytelling perspective. Maybe they were backed into a corner just because they just didn't have enough runtime. And it's the final episode of the show, so I guess there wasn't really much of a chance of like shooting some additional stuff or anything like that. It was like, nope. This is it. This is all we've got. We have to make it work however it works. Another problem I had with the episode, and this is, you not as detrimental to the story per se, but it is kind of distracting, is that the kids are heavily dubbed by different actors. The girl especially, Sport, she is clearly an adult doing a kid's voice that's dubbing her lines. Now, I don't know if they weren't happy with the kid's performance or something, or if this was just always the plan so they could get a more directed performance out of an adult actor who could, do other things that maybe the kid wouldn't be able to. But it's honestly very distracting, and for some reason she also has a different accent to like the rest of the family. It doesn't really make any sense. She's got a pretty thick southern accent or something. I mean, as far as my non-American ears can hear, I think it's southern, but it's very different to how either the parents sound, and that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me either. But the main problem though is just how distracting it is, because it's very clearly dubbed the entire time. It feels very artificial. There's this layer between you and enjoying what the performance actually is doing that just gets in the way. And it's one thing where you're watching like an old Italian Western and everyone's kind of awkwardly dubbed, so you just kind of get into it because you get used to everyone equally feeling weird. So you just sort of, after a little bit, you get used to it and just go with it. This is a bit different though, because it's really just the two kids who are heavily and badly dubbed. She sticks out a bit more, but I think the boy's also dubbed. With an older actor. In fact, if I look at IMDb, to be fair, I'm not seeing a credit for a voice for him. Whereas Sport has 2 credits. There's one for the actress playing the role on the screen, and there's one doing the voice, who didn't get credited actually, which is wild to me because the voice is like, she talks a lot. She has a lot of important dialogue. It's kind of weird that the voice actor who came in and redubbed all the lines, whether that was planned or that's something they decided to do in post, didn't get any credit for it. But hey, hopefully he got paid well. Probably not. It was a woman a voice actor being paid in the 60s. She probably got paid a pittance, but I hope not. I hope she got a decent paycheck at least. Other than that, like those are the big things. I mean, ultimately, there's some other little things I could point out, like, there's actually like a heavy introduction to this episode where at the end of the opening scene, which is actually basically the closing scene, Rod comes on camera and does his whole intro to the show, right? But then after we fade away from that and we come into the actual start of the story, and this maybe lends further credence to the idea that originally this like ending scene at the start wasn't supposed to be there, because when we cut to what is then the start of the story, Rod narrates a lot of that as well. Like he does his on-camera intro and then narrates quite heavily afterwards, and it felt a bit weird. And there's nothing wrong with what he says. What he says is it's the usual kind of fun playing with words, Rod Serling that we're used to. He's like introducing a mother who's a bit vapid and whatever, introducing a father who has the perfect house and wife and kids, but there's no happiness in this household or something. I can't remember exactly what he said, but he does like a sort of introduction of each of the players, and it's a whole thing, but it felt like kind of weird after already getting the on-camera one, which notably I don't think was in a location, because sometimes it's in a location where they're shooting the episode. He actually does the intro on the set or something, so it feels like he's walked into the story in a sort of weird breaking the wall kind of way. But here it was just kind of like I don't know, in a house somewhere. I don't know, somewhere random. So I mean, other than that, the parents just keep fighting, they keep bickering, they occasionally yell over at the kids to shut up and be quiet, and a little boy comes out of the pool and says hello, and the kids follow him, and it takes them to this magical dimension where this auntie, aunt space T, looks after children, makes them do chores, but is very nice to them and gives them rewards and whatever. Honestly, I think when I read the description last episode, I was thinking this was going to turn sinister and that she was actually a kidnapper. It's actually the first thing Sport says. Are you a kidnapper? Or one of the first things she says anyway. Which she denies that. And she's like, oh, I give kids a home, blah, blah, blah. And there's nothing ever in the episode to go against that. It seems like, yeah, she's on the up and up. There's nothing sinister going on here. But the Sport says we have to go back home. Jeb, the boy, doesn't want to. And she's like, no, we have to go. And Auntie says, well, you probably won't be able to come back, if ever, because it's very hard for a child to come back here again. Once you've left it, you kind of give it up the chance. But sure enough, like, after the ad break, one of the little story beats is that Jeb disappears and Sport figures out, oh, he must be there. So she swims into the pool. So she goes back as well and goes to get him. And again, Auntie's disappointed that they're leaving, but hey, like, what else can she do? But she does say, you know, like, I think right before she goes to look for him, the mum says, oh, we've got something to tell you kids. And it's clearly about the divorce. But the mum's like, oh, it's going to be better around here after what we tell you. Now, from the parents' perspective, it's better because they don't want to be around each other anymore, so they think it's a big improvement. But Sport kind of incorrectly takes that as, oh, things are going to improve, they're not going to be as bad anymore, and our home life is going to be better, and we're going to be loved. And she embellishes a lot of this. She adds a lot of things. She tells Jeb that the parents have promised to take them on trips, that they're going to love them. She says that to Auntie. But ultimately, when they come back, it's the divorce talk. And we just see the scene from the start of the episode again. And it plays out in full. There might even be a few extra bits, to be honest. But nothing that adds anything real to it. Just a little bit more of like the looking at the pool, and the dad eventually bobs back up and says he can't find them. And that is a little bit extra from what was at the start. But yeah, the end of the story is the kids are in this place with Auntie, and they're happy, they're having cake, they're doing whatever. And that's it. That's the story. Like, I don't think I would be in love with this story, right? I don't think the idea of a magical portal in the pool that takes you to a nice auntie who rescues kids from homes that are unloving, I don't think that's, at least in the style that it's presented here. As weird as this sounds, I actually think I'd like a darker version of this story, where it's a really bad home life, and the kid gets like a chance to leave and go here, but maybe there's like some subtext of like, oh, does this represent something else? Here, I'm not so sure it really does. It feels just a bit too, I don't know, whimsical, and I think Rod at the end says something about, oh, you know, the fantasy of these children who needed something better created this magical place, or something. You know, it's a little bit skewed for my taste, I think, even if it was presented in its best possible light. But I do think there's a couple of things really holding it back. The dubbing's kind of annoying and distracting, but the big thing is just completely showing the entire pivotal decision that the main character makes at the end of the story, right? Maybe present the choice she's going to have to make, but the fact that we actually get her making that choice already in the opening scene kind of robs much of the tension. Or it'd be okay if we knew she made the choice, but we didn't know what ultimately inspired it, because then we'd spend the episode going, oh, what's going to finally, you know, break her? What's going to finally like make her think, shit, we have to leave this place? But we get that as well at the start. We get that, like, we know it's going to be the conversation about divorce. We know where that's going, like, the entire time. And it's not even just like because you've got a feeling or speculation. We saw it. We saw it play out. It's such a weird choice. And maybe a necessary one just because they were trying to like stretch it for time. I don't know. But this was the Bewitchin pool. Unfortunately, Twilight Zone, the original show, is going out in a bit of a middling episode. If anything, I've probably been more negative than I have been than to even give it middling. Bordering on bad in some ways is probably where my opinion actually lies. I think I was just trying to be optimistic and nice. But actually talking about it, yeah, I don't think I like it very much. Which is not a big deal. It's an anthology show. That's one of the weird things about a show like this, is that unlike serialized TV shows where typically the finales are some of the most satisfying because things are paying off in big ways, Twilight Zone doesn't have that. Twilight Zone is all just individual stories, so some of the best episodes come at just the most random of times in the middle of a season, and then finales, like, I mean, have any of the finales of the seasons been particularly good? I don't actually know if they have been. Now, I'm curious. I'm going to go check. This one was obviously a bit of a dud. The end of season 1 was a world of his own. A writer demonstrates he can control reality by simply dictating changes. That was all right. It wasn't by any stretch like close to the best episode of season 1, though. I don't even think it made the top 10 that the Mean Tower did back when we reviewed it. So, but not a bad episode by any means. Not a standout one. End of season 2 was The Obsolete Man. Okay, that was pretty solid. Again, did that make our top 10 though? I feel like that's two solid finales, but not ones that stick out compared to some of the best of the season. Season 3 ended with The Changing of the Guard. Oh, that was the Donald Pleasance one where he's like the teacher. Yeah, again, solid, but not the best of the season. Yeah, yeah, not surprising. Season 4 must have been not great because a lot of season 4 wasn't great. The Bard, oh, that was the Shakespeare one. Yeah, yeah, that was terrible. Okay, just curious. I was just curious to check. Anywho, that is my thoughts on this final episode of the Twilight Zone. Like I said, I'll have a video doing a top 5 or 10 of the season in the next few weeks, so look out for that. But that is it. That is it. Pretty much done. That'll be our swan song, or goodbye to this classic show. I'll maybe do some more like sort of thoughts summing up my journey through the whole thing when I do that top 5 or 10. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed the journey with me and you're ready for one last stop in the Twilight Zone. But like I said, I have started doing the 1980s version of the Twilight Zone, about 7 or 8 episodes into that. I can't remember off the top of my head. But that's a Patreon sponsored one, and it comes twice a month. It's been pretty good. Like, there's been some stinkers, but there's been some great episodes as well. In true anthology form, it can really go either direction every single episode I watch. And because the episodes are split up into multiple stories, sometimes you get an episode that has an absolute all-timer, and then it's next that's paired to a stinker. It's all over the place in that sense, but for individual stories, there's been some really good ones already in that show. So if you haven't seen the 80s Twilight Zone, you can actually find it on YouTube. It's split up into the stories, but you can find it on YouTube, and you can watch along with the reviews as they come out or whatever. But I'd love to have you along for that. But this has been my thoughts on the Bewitchin pool. Thank you very much for joining me. You can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, which helps keep this channel going, as well as MailFuzz Movies, where all the movie podcasts live. Go check out those. There's a sci-fi one, which might be relevant to you, since you like Twilight Zone. Go have a look over there. You can also support on YouTube via YouTube membership if you would like. Patreon's a little bit better in the sense that you get, you're supporting both channels that way. But if you wanted to support specifically this channel, you can absolutely do that. Any and all support is greatly appreciated. It's how this can keep going. Thank you very much for joining me. See you next time. Keep watching TV in the Twilight Zone.